When you're younger, you kind of want to lay out your path, you want to do all of the right things. What I realize is that doesn't really work because you can plan as much as you want, but in the day and age that we live in, we just need to stay focused and just do the best we can.
Welcome back, everybody, to another edition of the Sustainable Ambassador Podcast. My name is Rich Brubaker. I'm the founder of Collective Responsibility. In this episode, I am extremely happy to be joined by Veronica Yow, Manager of ESG and Impact at the Meloy Fund for Sustainable Community Fisheries. Talking to her because I've known her for more than a decade now, knew her in the NGO space, been watching her transition over into the impact investment space, and going to talk a little about what that leap has been like, how this is part of her career, how she sees each one as being an effective tool towards change. With that, Veronica, thank you very much for joining the community here. It'd be great if you could properly introduce yourself and the work that you're doing.
So, hi everyone, my name is Veronica, and as Richard mentioned, I work for the Meloy Fund as the manager of ESG and Impact. I get involved anywhere along the investment process, starting from building pipeline to conducting ESG due diligence to estimating the impact of our portfolio companies. So I get to design TA projects with our investees in their supply chain to make sure that environmental sustainability aspect of their business is being taken care of.
But what's the background of the Meloy Fund? How did it come about? And what's the wider vision for the fund itself?
So the Meloy Fund came about from RARE. RARE has been running a sustainable fishery program at the local community level, supporting local leaders to develop co-management fishery programs. And at the same time, what they were also trying to do is sell the fish that's sustainably caught to down the supply chain. So initially that involves working with hotels in Manila, in Singapore, to get to the fish with a higher margin sold at those markets that demand sustainable seafood back to the fishers. Okay. And the difficult thing is working with the middle part of the supply chain. And that was the initial kind of impetus to start the Meloy Fund, to invest in those mid-level supply chain to be able to bring the fish to the end users.
How did you move in from RARE into the Meloy Fund as part of this process?
So when I first joined RARE, it was in their sustainable markets and finance team. And at that point, the sustainable agriculture program in China was just getting started. So I got involved with that. And my role was a lot on program management, in monitoring and evaluation, in supply chain engagement, which is very much to a certain extent what I'm doing right now. So I guess a lot of the skill sets are transferable across. And when my manager started the Meloy Fund, maybe about 3 years later, when the program in China ended, the natural progression was for me to join the Impact Fund.
But moving from a nonprofit to a fund seems like a big leap. Is this something that all nonprofit professionals should start planning on? It's like their fund experience is the next opportunity, or was this really just a unique thing for you?
I wouldn't necessarily say the trend, right? But blended finance is more and more common these days. You're just looking at what is the problem, what is the financing that's needed for the transition, which one is concessional, which one is commercial, and then kind of laying out the steps. And then who are then the investors that you can attract kind of along the investment needs. And having said that, it's not necessarily easy to be able to play that, to wear that NGO hat versus the investment hat. And that's why the investment fund has spun off kind of as an independent organization now.
What is the job that you do as a ESG and impact manager at a fund? Like what are the things that you're looking at? What are the things that you are influencing? What's your vision for change in this role?
A lot of what I do, I like to call it humanizing the supply chain. So our typical investees are your seafood processors. So they are mom and pop factory that buy fish and sells fish. So a lot of the times when we're talking about the environmental sustainability of a fishery, it gets pretty technical. You need marine scientists, you need to run the numbers, you need a lot of data to be able to understand, is what you're catching, will it still be there in 5 years, 10 years? And then engaging the government to start managing the fishery. So kind of what I do then, number one, is going into the company and understanding what policies do they already have with regards to ESG. So that includes for their employees, as well as then down their supply chain. How far along the supply chain can they actually trace what technologies are available for them to trace further down the supply chain? And I think really important is we have this TA facility to be able to provide grant funding to support our investees to trial new ways of sourcing, finding new partnerships that can support their fishes. So yeah, it's quite dynamic. Every day, there's kind of different aspects of it that play out. So yeah, it keeps the job interesting.
But if you're not a technical, say, supply chain person or a marine biologist or even a financier, what is your role in this? And then how are you, what's your job effectively at the end of the day?
I think my job is just figuring out what's the problem, right? And how to solve it and how to bring in the right people at the right time, to be able to see the big picture and then zooming into each technical aspect and then finding the right people to bring in to provide that specialization. That's my role.
So then how do you view your work, say now, compared to the work that you're doing at Rare in a pure nonprofit role? It's the same organization, but two different ways of hopefully achieving a similar goal.
Yeah, I think fundamentally what's different is when you're working on the commercial kind of private sector side, right? Our key challenge is really to integrate all the work that we're doing now into the policies of the company and making sure that, when we exit the investment, they will continue doing what we're already doing. Versus, as we all know, with NGO funding, there is a finite amount of time. And it is difficult to sometimes to maintain the momentum because of the constant need for funding. So that is a key difference, I would say. And then just coming in as an investor is a completely different ballgame compared to coming in as an NGO and say, hey, can you help us? But hey, we come in with money.
And what's the role of passion in your job? I mean, I remember a very young and passionate Veronica who was trying to save the world 10 years. Is there a place for that? Or is it, look, we're an investor now, and I've just started to really realize passion has a place, but not in this space right now.
I mean, passion is necessary because you got to believe in what you do. Because it's not easy. And it's not just about deploying capital. And my team will tell you, there are certain things that, Veronica really wants to see a change and a shift. And that may require bringing in earlier stage capital, partnering with other funds that we're just not seeing in the blue economy right now. It is a balancing act. But at the end of the day, I mean, yes, I believe you do need passion to keep it going, but not just passion alone, right? So yeah.
A lot of people, and I know that we've talked about this before, is the balance between impact and return on investment. A lot of times these funds are asking for almost the exact same ROI as a standard fund with the impact on top. How do you see that, and how do you try and fight for the little guy who facing a lot of market constraints so that they can find that balance?
You just got to be able to kind of understand, okay, where do I go in different deals? And at the end of the day, when you have a portfolio, then you're able to balance out also the returns and the impact. The investment thesis needs to be at the very least kind of not doing more harm. And then you kind of layer on different ways of achieving that impact based on the opportunities in the market.
Who are you helping, and how does the funding help them?
So half of our portfolio are the seafood processors. So we invest normally in high value species like tuna, blue swimming crab, octopus, and another half of our portfolio are the startups, mostly in aquaculture, in shrimp, seaweed, for example. So we provide either equity or debt investment into these businesses. That's when the fund starts, which is then tracing down the supply chain all the way to the fisher or the farmer level. So then how do we actually impact the fishers and the farmers? And that's looking at the sourcing policy of our investees. What payment terms, what is the size of the fish that they're catching? How are they ensuring that fishes are safe at sea, that they have a grievance mechanism? How are we returning higher margins back to the fishers? So those are all of the different elements that we ensure that fishers will benefit. And then at the same time, we provide additional grant funding to, for example, hire the NGOs to work at the fisher level, to set up fisher associations, cooperatives, run financial literacy training for the fishers and the farmers.
How do you ensure, to the best of your ability, transparency, and what are the gaps that you face, or what are the challenges around that people don't really understand? Because there's been a lot of controversy around this, and everyone wants to say oh, that's just greenwashing, or oh, they're just blah, blah, blah. But there's a lot of work here. So what's the challenges of getting that done, and how do you overcome that in your work?
So whenever possible, we go with what's already well-known standards in the industry, right? For example, we use the IFC performance standards in our ESG due diligence. But what we realize is, starting with known standards in the industry, it needs to be then catered or customized, I would say, to the sector. We're dealing with a small-scale fishery sector, which is different from your industrial and commercial fleet. So what we then do is, we take existing standards, then we customize to the realities that we see on the ground to create that feedback loop. What we also then do is, when we look at the seafood sector, the gold standard as of now is the MSC certification. So where possible, we ask our investees, can you source from fishery that's already certified? Or if not, can we put you on a pathway?
What's the work that goes in after you found the organization, after you've done the due diligence and you've given them the money? Like, are you still super active in the business, or are the groups that you're working with pretty much, they've got it all, they just need the money?
We play a really active role with our investees, because our model is also not just finding the ones that are already kind of sustainable and doing all the amazing things. We work a lot with traditional businesses that requires a bit of hand-holding about ESG matters, but also on the corporate governance, right? Running a family business is, very different from, let's say, a multinational, and particularly in the seafood sector, where, let's say, 90% of the businesses are these traditional businesses. So so inherently that you have to work with them if you want to see a change in the market towards that certification.
So talking about this in terms of like your own career, first off, how did you even get into sustainability? Like, what was your entry point? Was it an issue that you wanted to solve? Was it an organization you want to work with? Like, how did you get into this space, and what were you hoping to achieve?
Yeah, I'll start a bit kind of further backwards. So my basic, bachelor training was in, I did a BCom in accounting, and I started my career as a tax accountant, working on retirement funds. But I always knew I wanted to work on it in between sectors, whether it's like private or nonprofit or public. And as soon as I got my chartered accountant, I quit my job. So that's kind of my way of saying thank you, parents, for sending me to school. I've done what I could with it, and now off I go. And I went to Egypt at that 10 years ago now, during the Arab Spring, to work for PwC, running public health campaigns, working with corporates, universities. And I think, being in Egypt during the Arab Spring, doing this work was tremendous. It was a great opportunity to work across the sectors. I then did a year of international development in Uganda, more classic non-for-profit. And I went back to Egypt then to help PwC to set up their green entrepreneurship program. And at that time, I began to realize that it doesn't make sense where, companies make their money and then donate a portion of it. Sustainability needs to be integrated into the business model. And how do we do that? So that's when I did my master's in sustainability management in Washington, D.C. And at that time, I found an internship with RARE. And that was how I kind of got started into the NGO sector. So it's not kind of linear. It's not that necessarily planned out. It was just kind of what I saw as being the best opportunity for me at that point.
What's the role of passion and, say, mission for the work right now in your career? Like, is it something that you have and you're really clear about, and this opportunity feeds into the next one, which feeds into the next one, which all lines up? Or are you really just, as you said, you're kind of like, you didn't have a plan, you're kind of taking it as it comes?
When you're younger, right, you kind of want to lay out your path, you want to do all of the right things, and one thing leads to another, and you always want to have some sort of plan. So what I realized is that doesn't really work, because you can plan as much as you want, but in the day and age that we live in, that's just not going to roll. So the best thing that I would say is, you need to believe in what you do, and the passion alone is not enough, because then that leads to burnout. And then you need to be able to, set clear boundaries. And I'm sure a lot of people in sustainability struggle with, how far can your passion take you? And I think really at any point in time, seeing kind of what's in front of you, right? The opportunity, is this still aligned with what you really want to do and what you believe in, and giving your best. And that is enough. You're planting the seeds, but don't expect the plant to bloom the next day, right? I think that's also the other piece of that sense of urgency that we feel in for sustainability professionals. We just got to take it in stride and do our best given what we have or know is on the plate right now.
You have rough experience in kind of profit and nonprofit at this point. What are, in your view, the positives of each and what are the constraints of each?
I mean, the benefit is actually, you come with a checkbook, right? And it's like, hey guys, what would you like, how you want to grow your business, blah, 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 that just opens doors. But the challenge there is then when you want that impact at the community level, it's very challenging because a lot of these local communities, they're left behind for certain reasons. There's just many systemic issues that private capital alone may or may not be able to solve. And on the NGO sector, and as we are aware with the funding cycle, which is like 2 years, 3 years, whereas the development impact really takes much, much, much longer time. And I fundamentally believe in capacity building is necessary. In terms of what's for me, I'm entertaining the possibility of starting something of my own, or like I mentioned, kind of going back to my family business. And if I am to set something up, it would be more along the social enterprise model. So kind of a for-profit and a B Corp that's that we're not about maximizing shareholder value. So but in terms of stakeholders' value. So I think that's the sweet spot.
What advice would you give to a young professional, perhaps a student who's looking to focus their career on this space?
Seize the opportunity. I think these days there are so many ways to be involved. When I was working as a tax accountant and just like counting down the hours, I just volunteered with different NGOs to find that what I'm passionate about, what I'm good or may not be good at, what I like and what I don't like. I think making that initial foray and step is challenging, but the opportunities are there. So I would say just connect, find, wherever you can start in whichever, so that you begin to build up the experience and you begin to find the type of people that you want to be working with. Earlier, I would say like, start with the corporate sector. But I think these days it doesn't really matter. I think as long as you find kind of like impact oriented roles wherever that is, not just doing what you think you should, but really what you would love to do, like when you wake up every day and this really drives you. So that's another key part of it. And you wouldn't know unless you try enough things. So that's what I kind of recommend. Like, if you're young in your career, just kind of try out different things and then hone in on like, what is then your whatever value proposition, what do you have to offer, and it will come. And then just to trust the process. Yes.
Does having a sustainability degree help? Is it required? Do you think it's better to have a technical degree? Like what's your thoughts on the whole sustainable education space?
Yeah, I think when I did it 5 years ago, I think it's still fairly new. So the degree, the master's program that I did was quite general. It kind of gives you a snapshot into all of the different fields. And personally, I would have preferred something more technical. But what I've seen now as I started working is you really need people who can connect the dots. And then that means a more kind of generalist view rather than a technical specialist, which you can always hire.
Thank you very much for your time.